Thanks, Mike. Good morning again. First of all, I'd like to again acknowledge the Wurundjeri people on whose land that we're speaking on today as the owners of the land, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. I would also like to acknowledge all Indigenous people in the symposium, particularly my co-presenters, Angela, Andrew, Sadie and Tyson's presentation will be presented to. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us today. And I'd like to say it's a real honour to be presenting with my co-presenters. I'd also like to thank the organisers, especially Professor Mike Keppel and Associate Professor Les Brennigan, for their strong support for this panel and for their recognition of the critical importance of this work to Swinburne. Today we want to start a conversation about approaches to engaging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander pedagogies, curriculums and knowledges. We'll be following today's panel with a half-day Indigenous teaching workshop on the 17th of October, and I'll talk about more of that later in the presentation, which everyone's invited to. So why is this important? Well, I thought it'd be useful to see some of the key reports about the higher education sector over the last few years. And many of these reports have strongly recommended the engagement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curriculum, pedagogies and knowledges. So the 2014 University Australia Indigenous Cultural Competency Framework, guiding principle 2 states, all graduates of Australian universities will have the knowledge and skills necessary to interact in a culturally competent way with Indigenous communities. And what's critical about some of these frameworks we're talking about is it's talking about all graduates. It's talking about students from right across STEM, health, education, Indigenous studies, business, law, art and design, a whole range of areas. The Burt review, Larissa Barrett's review, the 2012 review of higher education access and outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's final report states, the panel proposes that universities develop Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teaching and learning frameworks that reflect the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge within curriculums, graduate attributes and teaching practices. The Bradley report, the 2008 review of Australian higher education final report, also supports strongly this issue. They state Indigenous knowledge should be embedded into the curriculum to ensure that all students have an understanding of Indigenous culture. Swinburne's own Reconciliation Action Plan, which you can see a copy on our Indigenous Matters homepage, also strongly supports engaging with Indigenous knowledges, cultures and pedagogies. So how are we performing in this critical area at Swinburne? Earlier this year, I organised the Indigenous Studies Teaching, Research and Engagement Audit at Swinburne, and Angela was very helpful with helping to organise and to analyse a lot of this data. This is the first such audit ever conducted at Swinburne, and possibly the first ever conducted at any Australian university. It was designed to develop an overall picture of the research, teaching and engagement activities that Swinburne staff across the higher education faculties and PAVE and across the university, what activities they were conducting in relation to Indigenous issues. I'm currently meeting with faculty and PAVE executive committees and academic committees to outline the findings relating to teaching in relation to their specific area. I'll also provide a detailed analysis of the overall teaching reports that we've developed from this audit at our Indigenous Teaching Symposium on the 17th of October. Today, given the time restrictions, I just wanted to provide a short overview of the teaching audit and just to bring out some specific data. So there's 180 valid responses to the survey. The vast majority were from FAD with 83 responses, but we still had a reasonable number, 20 from Faculty of Business and Law, 43 from the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Technology, and 29 from PAVE. So just a couple of the statistics that come out. There's some really good qualitative data that we don't have time to go into here, but there's some really interesting data coming out as well. So does your unit contain Indigenous content? In FAD, we had just over half said that there was some content, and in PAVE there was just under half that said there was some content. And the other two faculties, Faculty of Business and Law, just had 10% of the content, and FSED only 2% of the content. But when you looked in how much Indigenous content was in the actual units being discussed, the vast majority across all the faculties and PAVE, particularly FHAD and PAVE, which had quite a lot of content, was 1 week or less. So there's very little content being delivered. The majority of respondents thought that this content level was appropriate. Do Indigenous people teach the Indigenous content? And this is one of the key things regarding to any inclusion of Indigenous curriculum, is having Indigenous people teaching it. And the vast majority, well into the 90% of all these courses being discussed, involve no Indigenous people teaching the content. Similarly, most resources regarding the Indigenous content were not Indigenous authored resources. Again, collaborations with Indigenous peoples, there was very few collaborations, and the Indigenous content was generally not assessed in these areas. We asked respondents whether they felt the inclusion of Indigenous content in their discipline was important. And it's probably no surprise that FAD and PAVE had the 3 largest responses, most significant, well into the high 90s, to either strongly agree that it was important, agree, or neutral. So PAVE and FAD had some strong responses there. The Faculty of Business and Law really ranged around agree, disagree and neutral. And FSED, the strong responses around disagree and strongly disagree. And this is part of the conversation. We're really trying to discuss this and bring these conversations up. Many examples of best practice exist in Australia where Indigenous curriculum is being engaged with across all areas of the university. So Chris Matthews, Indigenous academic at Griffith University, is one of the leading Indigenous mathematicians in the country. He's done an enormous amount of work of engaging Indigenous curriculum in mathematics, example. The confidence about teaching Indigenous content, again, FHAD and PAVE had much stronger levels of confidence in teaching than Faculty of Business Law and FSED. How am I going to put on?
You're about 10 minutes over.
I'll finish up. We also asked what resources could assist you in teaching Indigenous content. And I'll just quickly run through these. Obviously, we don't have time to go into any more detail. More Indigenous academics, more funding for Indigenous guest lecturers, cultural awareness training, training and professional development to develop appropriate curriculum, more resources, online journals, videos, programs, case studies, etc. Funding and time for course development. Increasing the profile of the Indigenous Studies minor. A designated learning space for Indigenous content. A reading discussion network group. An Indigenous Studies seminar. Partnerships with organisations and communities, and university policies on Indigenous curriculum. Now, many of those we're going through. For example, the Indigenous Teaching Workshop is, as I said, has been set and organised for October the 17th. We've also, it's important to note, at a university level, done a number of activities. So HR has now organised a Indigenous employment strategy where people, applicants can be specifically requested to be from Indigenous people themselves. We have a cultural awareness course that probably many of you have done, the online courses, as well as also walking tours. We have a much bigger increased profile of Indigenous studies now through our Indigenous Matters homepage. An Indigenous Studies group has been formed, which we now have about 50 members across the university looking at research and teaching activities. I'm really pleased to announce that we've recently been able to get strong support from the Swinburne Research Office to have an allocated Indigenous Supra scholarship and also an Indigenous postdoctoral fellowship, which is fantastic news. And we also have an Indigenous Knowledge Hub. So I probably should finish there. We look forward to continuing this conversation throughout this presentation, but also during the upcoming Indigenous Teaching Workshop, and also as an ongoing process. We look to the continued engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges, pedagogies and curriculum at Swinburne. Thank you.
The short version.
So, hi everyone, my name's Angela Burt. As you can see up on the bit of introduction there on the screen, my background is in education as a primary teacher, doing some lecturing here in Indigenous perspectives for first year education students. I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about what's happening in primary schools, high schools, as far as Indigenous perspectives is going, and to start the conversation, to start seeing where the effect of this later on for students that are coming through to university, because obviously there will be some, the conversation needs to continue, and we need to start having a think about ways in which we can tap into some of that expert knowledge and incorporate it into all of our teaching areas. As we sit here together on Wurundjeri land, our presence dictates that we, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are active participants in the evolving story of this place. Your role in this story is determined by your own experiences, your personal culture, your connection to the culture of this place. Swinburne has a strong connection to its Indigenous story, which includes partnerships with various communities, a strong reconciliation action plan, innovative research and inclusive practices. In addition, Swinburne teachers are incorporating Indigenous perspectives and knowledge into various units, with some units exclusively teaching Indigenous content, although, as Andrew said, not as much as we would like to possibly see. So what we're looking at today is starting a conversation about the idea of incorporating Indigenous perspectives and ways of knowing into all of our teaching areas. We're not talking about critiquing current teaching and auditing planning to identify misrepresentations of Indigenous people. What we're looking at could be referred to as value adding, I think. What we're looking at are ways that we can utilise Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing to enhance unit content and current pedagogy. I want you to consider, how connected are you to the fact that we live in a place that is home to the world's oldest living culture? Indigenous people possess an immense knowledge of their environments, an understanding of the properties of plants and animals, the functioning of ecosystems and techniques for using and managing them for foods, medicines, fuels and building materials. They're expert at preservation of history and culture, sustainability of social structures and legal systems. Indigenous people have deposited rich knowledge into all of the key learning areas, from English to maths and science to art, history, health and wellbeing. The question is, do we acknowledge this knowledge? And do we give ourselves time to actively look for it? That's the first slide. So the Australian Curriculum and Foundation to Year 12 acknowledges this Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing is worthy of inclusion in all curriculum areas, not just for Indigenous students, but for all students. As you can see up there, a bit of a description of that. Why? It's to encourage conversations between learning areas, enabling teachers to make explicit connections and develop a shared language for discussing the construction of knowledge. Reconciliation and closing the gap are two policies, obviously, which underpin this change, but we are finally looking beyond the deficit model that focuses only on the educational attainment of Indigenous students and looking at the power of education for addressing some of the systemic issues. Okay, next one. As well as looking at the idea of underpinning Indigenous knowledge into all of the curriculum areas, it has been expanded. And this is the work of Tyson Yunkaporta, who will be presenting via video after this, who's working at Swinburne at the moment. And you can see from up there that he has, through very comprehensive research, constructed for primary school teachers, high school teachers, early childhood teachers, defined 8 ways of knowing. Obviously, there has to be a way in which the knowledge of Indigenous people has been sustained and continues to be passed on today. And that is because there's obviously a very expert way in which those knowledge systems are passed on and retained. And it's looking at, if you're teaching content, you also can have a look at incorporating an Indigenous way of knowing, which is actually being inclusive of different learning styles and different ways of learning. So primary school teachers, high school teachers have access to this wonderful toolbox that we can look at and we can take from and we can incorporate into all of the learning areas that we teach every day across all of different levels. And of course, by doing that, we are providing our students with a shared language. Educators have a shared language, and that's been consistently used. And on the educational journey of these students, you can only begin to think the students of the future who have been having this for a 12-year journey of schooling, when they're coming to post-compulsory years of schooling, is that conversation going to continue? I hope that it will, but if it is going to continue, maybe that's something, the conversation that we need to start having now with each other, and actively making it a priority, as the Australian curriculum has done, that it is something that's incorporated all of the time. Next. So obviously, universities have had to respond to the fact that the Australian curriculum is incorporating these perspectives into all areas, and it is a compulsory subject for first-year education students to do 12 weeks of Indigenous perspectives. Here at Swinburne, that is made up of 6 weeks of explicit teaching of culture, which Andrew has done. And it's also looking at 6 weeks of really looking at the curriculum, looking at the tools and the ways in which you would plan and the ways in which you would what it would look like when you get into the classroom. Why is that the case? Half and half. Well, obviously, if you are expected to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into all curriculum areas, you really have to know your stuff. And for a lot of our students that are coming in and working with us, from their own educational journeys, they have a lot of gaps, a lot of knowledge, a lot of rich, important knowledge was never talked about. Some people have journeys where they've never met an Indigenous person. So there's massive gaps. So what we're doing is, at this point, we're trying to cram a lot of knowledge into a short amount of time. However, the journey and the growth of those students over those 6 weeks, it's a tough 6 weeks, but when they've come out at the end of it, they've just had this an amazing, light bulb moment where they've gone, wow, I wish I'd known about that earlier. It's a shame that it's taken me this long to get to that point in my adult life where this is now what I know when I live in this country. So that knowledge paired with what we're talking about here and the pedagogies and the curriculum knowledge means that here is what, just put a snapshot. This is a Year 5 lesson. I spent a lot of time in teaching Year 5. A Year 5 lesson plan for an English lesson. So we're seeing written up here, of course, the Victorian curriculum link, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander curriculum priorities, and the 8 ways of knowing into an everyday lesson plan. So we're not just looking at, yes, this is an English lesson, of course, but how am I going to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into that? It may be in the choice of the resource that I use, and also let's adapt the way in which we are doing this lesson to creatively put together a holistic lesson that is not just focusing on one thing, but because we are knowledgeable and confident in our understanding of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, that we can put it all together and it becomes a natural thing that teachers are doing. You don't have to think about it. That's just what we're doing. It's what we're all doing. And we understand why we're doing it, and that hopefully will become something which doesn't need to be taught as explicitly, because the students that are coming through will not have as many gaps in their educational understanding. That's it. It's as simple as that.
Thanks, Angela. I'll just take over now for a second. And the next thing we've got to show you is a short video that Tyson did with Andrew last week. Now, Tyson Younger-Porter, as Angela's just pointed out, is a bit of a pioneer in terms of Indigenous education, and anyone who's worked in this space will know who Tyson is, and we've been blessed to have him here at Swinburne, even though it unfortunately is going to be for a short time. This round, we're hoping we'll still be able to maintain a sort of working relationship with him. Tyson's going to talk to us now about something called Sand Talk. Now, the sound isn't great because our videographer isn't all that experienced.
It was on the mobile.
He had his iPhone pointed the wrong way. But the essential message that Tyson's trying to get across is very clear. And the concept is called Sand Talk. And what he explains at the beginning is all of the diagrams that he's using in this next video are done in the sand, in the ground, in the land from which all culture emerges. And he'll explain some broad concepts around learning, and it's a very sort of broad fundamental pedagogy that he's talking about, but it's still a really important one. I should also point out that this is not something that we yet to do at Swinburne, but it's certainly something that we're very, very keen to do. So I guess one of the messages that we wanted to get through today to you all is that none of you will be doing this, but none of us are doing it either. So we want you to join us on a learning journey to embrace some of these concepts and find ways that we can introduce them to our pedagogies here at Swinburne.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is a bit of sand talk. Obviously, well, we couldn't find any sand in the uni, like a place in the dirt to do this, so we're going to do it up on the whiteboard here instead. I guess it doesn't matter where you do it, it's still the same thing. So sand talk is a visual and social pedagogy that Aboriginal people all over Australia have done since forever. So it's basically when we're talking, where we're doing, we'll be sitting around and we'll be, making these images, creating these images as we speak to explain and get ideas across to each other. So we'll be, drawing those in the sand. So just, give you an idea. We start with, it's always narrative based too often, so I guess we start with the biggest story ever. You might see it there with what you call Orion and his belt there, and you see that boom, that's where that Big Bang, that first point of contact there, point of impact in the center of that one, and it created that point of impact there, and these 7 spirit families, and that point of impact, so it split things, and then out everything came, point of impact there, and the 7 spirit families kept coming out, and so this is a sign here for a man, looks like this, and that impact might keep coming back the other way, and once again 7 spirit families, it's always the 7. And for a woman, this is the oldest symbol in the world. Archaeologists call it the circumpunct. It's all around the world, and they say, oh, I wonder what it could mean. If only we could go back in time and find out what it means. But we all know what it means. That's a child there, and that's woman. That's woman and child, which is the center of all of our cultures, the center of our society, the center of everything. Always. There's that point of impact again, and that woman. And, of course, from that, you can look this sunrise and sunset dreaming, and once again, that's 7 spirit families. And if you go up to Orion, around this time of year, and then you go look off to the left a bit, you'll see a smaller one, and that's the 7 sisters there. And that's called the 7 sisters all around the world. No matter where you go, you'll find it called that. So sunrise and sunset dreaming might also look like this, with a point of impact there. And once again, those 7 spirit families. And you find that that's the big story from everywhere. Everywhere you go in Australia, you find turtle story. And these songlines go out everywhere, like a big web that goes out all around, goes all over. And one of those big stories, those big meta-narratives that goes right across everywhere, it's this one, and it starts with that point of impact in the center. When that giant echidna hits that turtle right there. And then one thing became 2 things. It's funny, the old fellas tell you this story and you can't believe they're actually telling you the Fibonacci sequence, because 2 things then became 3, which became 5, and then out of that came 8 in those in-between parts there, and that 8 and the 5 made 13, and you got that turtle shell. And that turtle shell, it's a really good thing to draw it. It helps your concentration. In fact, most of our cultural activities are things that improve our concentration. So to do something like this, to do anything in Aboriginal culture, is to produce an alpha wave state, what scientists call alpha wave state in your brain. You might see, look here, you see these little hexagons formed there? It's good to draw this. if you ever want to concentrate, try drawing this turtle exactly like this. And turtle is also a good thing to use to organise knowledge. I use it to organise units of work. If I'm designing curriculum, I use it to organise essays. So I'm working with my old people's ways when I'm doing everything. I also use it for inductive and deductive reasoning. If I need to figure out ideas, you'll find these 3 circles here of knowledge. So, at the point there in the middle, I might have an unknown, I might have a question, so I'd work my way in from the outside and put all the things that I know there, and then go, well, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, this, and this. So then I'll look at those things, and I'll analyse those and see what they all point to. And so there you have your inductive reasoning there. If you want to do deductive, it's basically the other way around. You already have the answer, so you might have to say something like, I don't know, where you already have the answer, something like, stop the boats. Stop the boats. And so then you have point A, point B, point C. You basically just build your argument, and then you put your evidence in these ones. So you can actually build a really good argument, no matter where you're coming from. I love using the turtle for that kind of thing. Not stopping the boats, but for building an argument. And so that's Sand Talk. That's how Sand Talk works. It's a visual pedagogy. It stood the test of time. It's a human thing, and it works for everybody.
The video does look better in real life. It's been elongated for that. But we will have that, I'm sure it'll be on this conference's website. We'll also have it on the Indigenous Matters homepage. And it's a real privilege to see that video and to see Tyson's knowledge being discussed in this. And we're hoping to get Tyson back to Swinburne to do a guest seminar for people who are interested sometime later this year, where he can expand upon these ideas.
Thanks, Andrew. So it's just one example, I guess, of the work that Tyson's been doing in talking to elders. And he mentioned in that talk something about songlines. Some of you may be familiar with that concept, some of you may not. But songlines refers to the connections between all Indigenous communities and cultures and peoples all over Australia, all over the land. It's very well connected to land, as I mentioned before, and it's a very important part of Aboriginal story and Aboriginal history. And Tyson's done a wonderful job in some of his work in incorporating that into what we'd probably call modern pedagogy. Modern's not the right word, of course, but contemporary pedagogies is probably a better way to express it. What I'm going to talk to you now is just a little about myself and what we do at Swinburne at the moment, and also talk about how you might be able to utilise some of this in terms of local culture and knowledge. I'm a Wurundjeri Yorta Yorta man. Like Angela, I'm a product of the white education system. I didn't learn language growing up. I didn't learn specific customs and traditions. Partly because I didn't have anyone around me that knew that sort of thing. Also, of course, being a product of urban Australia, we weren't allowed to. My people, who come from Corandurk Aboriginal Reserve, were forbidden to perform cultural practices, forbidden to speak their own language whilst they were living on the reserve, much like most Aboriginal people in the urban parts of Australia. So for most of us, 90%, 95% of our culture was completely destroyed through colonisation. So it's one of the challenges that we, I guess, face as contemporary Aboriginal people living in an urbanised setting, is to try and show the value of our culture and show and emphasise why it's so important to us. My background and my culture is no less important to me than my brothers and sisters growing up in Central Australia, who get to practice their traditions, who understand their own connections to land, who get to live Sand Talk every day. It's very different, but it's no less important, and certainly no less important to me. Could I just see, first of all, a show of hands, how many people here were born in Australia? Okay. Repeat after me, please, everybody. Waminjika. You've all just practiced one element of a 1,000-year-old culture, thousands and thousands of years old. Waminjika is Woiwurrung for welcome. Woiwurrung is the language of the Wurundjeri people where we are. Everyone who just raised your hand, you were born on Aboriginal land. In traditional times, and I don't like that word, but traditional times means pre-contact, before the Europeans arrived. If you were born on land, you were connected to it. Your bloodlines may indicate that you belong to another people, as in my case, for example, but you have a connection to that land where you were born. So by that rationale, everybody here has a connection to Aboriginal land. Some of you were born on Wurundjeri country, so you are connected to Wurundjeri land. Wherever we travel as Aboriginal people, we make a connection with that land. We respect the traditional owners, we respect the history, we respect the culture of that land. So in terms of our pedagogy here, all we simply need to do is learn a little about Wurundjeri culture, and that can come out in our teaching, it can come out to our students. And as Angela mentioned, if we can do that, we'll find that teaching Aboriginal culture becomes a much, much easier thing to do for us all. It doesn't just belong to us as descendants of Aboriginal people. You are part of it now because you were born here and you're part of Australian culture and history. So again, as I often tell my students here, you have a responsibility to learn about that history as well. It's about understanding your connection, understanding how you can connect to that culture and history. You don't have to connect to it in the way that I do. If you're a visitor to Melbourne, if you're not from this land, you don't have to do it in the same way that Angela has done it, for example, as a Tasmanian Palawa woman. You find your own way to understand and connect to that culture and history. And that can be through a range of different things. One of the things that I often do here at Swinburne when I do acknowledgements is talk about the importance of country, culture and heritage to us all. I often use the analogy in my classroom too to students about Australia, contemporary Australian society being an adopted child. We know very well who one of our birth parents is because we've been taught our whole history about British heritage. So we know that Britain is, as often termed in Australia, the motherland. But we don't know enough about our other parent, and that is our Aboriginal parent, the land, the culture that comes from the land where we all live. We're very proud to talk about how it's great to be Australian and we are the lucky country, but we know nothing about the history and what that means to us and what the actual land means. The foundations of this building are dug into Wurundjeri country, so we're connected to it right now. Find a way for you all to make your own connection to it. That's the sound of wah. W-W-A. Wah is the black raven or black crow, who is the protector spirit or moiety of the Wurundjeri people, as he is for many of the Southeast Australian clans of Aboriginal people. I tell my students when you go out, listen for that noise. And a lot of students say, yeah, I heard it this morning. That's Wah calling out, like he did for thousands and thousands of years to the Wurundjeri people, calling out, I'm here, I'm protecting you. It's a direct connection to thousands and thousands of years of history right in this place. But we don't look at those things, we look beyond that. And it's a simple way, utilising Tyson's method of the sand talk. We can utilise things like Bunjil the eagle, who is our creator spirit, Wah the raven, who we see every day here at Hawthorn, the gum tree, the grandfather tree. We can utilise that symbolism to help with our pedagogy in exactly the same way that Tyson talked about the sand talk there as well. And that can inform our teaching, as I mentioned before. One of the greatest tools I've used is to get the students to understand that they are part of this. They are part of the culture, part of the history. And once they do that, I find a shift in their thinking. It becomes easier for them to understand it because they are part of that connection. Now, in my teaching at the moment, I teach an undergrad minor stream of 4 units. At the moment, I use very small elements of what we've been talking about, but it's certainly something that I want to increase as well. Andrew mentioned before something about the teaching audit. Assessment is a bit of a shackle, I guess, for a lot of this requirement. That's certainly not something that can't be overcome. The challenge is there for us all, but it's certainly not a challenge that is insurmountable. It's something that we can all overcome quite easily. I've been very heartened by the support we've received at Swinburne, and very heartened by the colleagues that I have here now at the university, and I'm sure that in the future we can come up with specific and contextualised ways to utilise some of the methods that we've talked about in the last 20 minutes or so into all the teaching that we do here and of course at other universities as well. So that's it for me. I'll now hand over to you, Sadie.
Yes, wonderful. I don't like when we can't hear me because I'm fabulous. So firstly, I would like to apologise for being just so large, much larger than the rest of the panel, so I'm so sorry. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about a few different roles that I hold. So I am a Swinburne PhD student in Indigenous oral history. So I'm very much talking about myself and my own position within this wonderful university. But I'm actually also the president of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Postgraduate Association. So I actually represent the 2,492 in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander postgraduate students that we currently have enrolled as of the end of year 2015, our latest stats. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we can actually get that student voice on all levels of the decision making within the university. And this is actually an area that we're really focusing in the sector, we're really focusing on now, because how can you provide good education if you don't have that voice from the students themselves? And so how do we in Swinburne incorporate that into our teaching and our learning and our ability to make culturally safe environments for our students? Now, I know that we don't have the largest cohort of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but we have a really good cohort of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And I think it's really important to build that voice and build the momentum, because we are daily bringing in more students. And I think it's really important to build that momentum also in the postgraduate student sector, because as you yourselves would know, a lot of postgraduate students work in universities, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander postgraduate students can even hold senior positions within universities, and so their voice gets a little bit lost as a student. And so how do we incorporate that voice, and how do we create cohorts and hubs so that we can enable that voice to be stronger and to actually build on itself? And so for myself, I'm actually, this is probably a little bit too honest, but I myself had a really good Indigenous student cohort when I was an international student during my Fulbright at an American university. So I went to the University of Hawaii, and what I found on campus is how heavily that education system pushes getting postgraduate students together. And I would just love to see that more so in Australian universities as well, just how important it is. Even if, say for myself right now, as an academic at the University of Southern Queensland, I'm not physically really on campus very much. How can we then create those cohorts digitally? So some of you may have seen that I've already tweeted during this session. I can't tweet while I'm talking though, because that's rude. But how do we incorporate our new digital age into our learning systems? Because we are very much an online university. We do really rely on talking to a lot of our cohorts of students that don't necessarily come to campus. So how do we create those cohorts that are undergrad cohorts that are usually subject-based into new innovative cohorts for our postgraduate students, particularly our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander postgraduate students? I know that we have just over 16,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students altogether in Australia, and so we really are, that figure is 1,000 more students than the data the year before. So we are actually growing as a student sector, and so how can we actually still strive to gain that parity within that sector? And I think that we as a young, innovative university are really in an amazing place to put that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander student voice into not only our unit creating, into our day-to-day classrooms, but also onto our online system. So how do we make that a more culturally diverse and culturally safe place for the students that we are just we want to build, and that we're just so incredibly excited to build. And I think that for myself, as a president, I go to a lot of different conferences and I hear from a lot of different students about, well, this is what my university does and this is what my university does and this is what I feel that lacks. And I think that we can really take that data on and we can go, well, all right, how do we create the best? How do we create a thing that our students feel so culturally safe in our university that they go out to their communities and they say, you have to come to Swinburne because this is the place to be. And I think that by creating a hub, both physically and digitally, we can really, really do that. And I think that, I know I promote my university because I really love my university, but making sure that we are that voice out there, that we go, you know what, we are here for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And I think that also by having programs that are maybe a little bit more focused towards that as well in our postgraduate studies, because a lot of our students are that diverse range of cohort of students. They are the parental student, the adult learner. They are those students that are coming into education not so young generally. And so how do we build the voice for those students and build that environment? So I'm just really, really excited to be here and to be talking and to be learning from the amazing colleagues that I have sitting in the room there.
Thanks, Sadie.
So I wonder if we throw questions there.
That's fine.
In terms of things, so questions from the audience, if you do want to ask a question, if you could wait for someone to bring the microphone to you so we can record as well. So questions from the audience, from the panel. Very powerful session.
Shall I like this?
As you'll agree, I think great job with the technology, David and Josh, getting the connections there as well.
Actually, yeah.
So questions from the audience. I suppose the first question I would ask, first question over here, thanks.
I was just going to ask the panel how important you think it is to facilitate scholarships to increase access for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners.
Very important, and across the whole range of areas. And I know that Jill, you and Angela are working on some really good scholarships where students can do a couple of units and see how they go. We need to have scholarships at every level, and so, as I said before, it's great that we've now got a dedicated Indigenous Supra, a Swinburne University Postgraduate Research Award at Swinburne, where every year we're going to get a new Indigenous HDR student. Following up from what Sadie was saying, we've only got 3 Indigenous high degree research students at Swinburne, which is very low. The overall number across the university is below parity, but it's very below parity here. And so one of the things we really want to do is increase that number. And I'd love to see Indigenous HDR students not just studying in education and health, which is very important, but also seeing Indigenous HDRs in STEM, business, law and other areas as well. So I agree, Jill, I think scholarships are one of a number of things we need in our toolkit to encourage more students here.
So other questions from the floor? We've got time for probably one more question there. If you just wait for the microphone if you could, yeah.
Andrew, Professor Andrew Gunston, if you can see potential in a unit or course of study to integrate some of the Indigenous knowledge, is there going to be like a consultancy arm within Swinburne where academics can kind of coordinate with the
well, thanks for bringing that question up, because sorry if I'm trying to condense a huge amount of data into a very short presentation, but that was one of the things that people came up about, what resources that they'd like. And certainly with the people we've got at Swinburne, Andrew, Angela, Sadie, Tyson and many others, there's scope for people to get some advice. Also, we do have this Indigenous Studies group where we're having regular seminars so people can come along and talk about some of these issues here. And excuse me. Certainly, I'd encourage everyone to come to this Indigenous teaching workshop, which I've actually got flyers for at the moment, which is on the 17th of October, because we really want to encourage people to come from a broad range of disciplines so we can look at ways. And when you're looking at talking about Indigenous curriculum and pedagogies, there's a whole range of things. As Tyson just talked then in the video, it's about various pedagogies. We can also look at having the breadth of Indigenous studies across the curriculum. Some universities have a mandated course requirement that across all courses, all students at that university will be doing some form of Indigenous studies. So obviously we need Indigenous studies in depth, which we've got through Andrew's minor, and hopefully we're going to look at getting that into a major, but we want the breadth as well. There's a number of ways to look at it. La Trobe University, for example, under the guidance of Professor Mark Rose, an eminent Indigenous education academic, he has organised so that every commencing student at Swinburne, at La Trobe, has to do a short course in Indigenous studies. And it's only an hour, but that's done a number of things. One, it's increased across all the range of students, for the students who are never going to probably learn much more about Indigenous studies, at least some knowledge. And it's also increased the number of students who are doing Indigenous studies, because a number of students are really interested in that short course and they've gone to do Indigenous studies. So there's certainly resources here, and I'd encourage anyone who's interested to get in contact with me, put your name on the Indigenous Studies group, and we can start sending out some information. Thanks. And please pick up a flyer. I'll leave this just here as you go. Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to make one more comment before I think we need to close, and that's Mark Rose has written a lot about Indigenous education, and one of the concepts he talked about was, I can't remember the exact phrasing that he used, but it's almost like racism by omission. And what that refers to is, and it's a kind of an extreme way of looking at it, but the results sort of bear this out, is that a lot of non-Indigenous teachers, academics, educators don't feel they know enough about culture to be able to teach it. They don't have the connections, or they don't feel they have the connections with the community to be able to do anything meaningful with it, so they avoid doing it. And the safe option is to do nothing. They don't compel principals, for example, don't compel teachers to engage with it because they don't know enough to support them, or they don't feel they know enough to support them. And the result has been, because that's been the Australian way for that kind of attitude for around 30 years or so, before that it was simply too hard, we're just not getting anywhere. The two elements are our Indigenous kids aren't learning in the education system that we have, and our non-Indigenous kids aren't learning anything about the culture and history of their own country. So I'd encourage you all to take that leap of faith. We have some staff here. Andrew's a good first point of contact, because that takes the pressure off me as well. But it's a very good thing. Everyone here could benefit in some way, shape or form, and we can work together with you to find the way that's going to suit you in your job the best, I think. So I really wanted to just make sure that we encourage you all to, as I say, take that leap of faith. If you've been thinking about it but you haven't been sure, just give it a go, and we'll see what we can do together.